What is desperation? What is surrender, right? We talk about surrender. We talk about desperation. I know for me and for countless others that I know, in a process, when you're giving up, you have to surrender old ideas. You have to surrender old beliefs. You have to surrender old habits. That is no different than surrendering when you're in army, in a war, or in combat. Surrender is surrender. I have never yet seen through history, and I love history, where an army or a country surrendered until they were desperate.
That's a great point. Exactly.
So desperation is required in order to surrender to, at the time, such a foreign concept as recovery.
Right.
You know how foreign that is to us, that our brain is telling us that if we don't have that substance in the next 2 minutes, we're gonna die.
All right. Well, welcome to another version of Finding New Waters. I am sitting here today with Sam Winston Davis, who is an interventionist, and Darryl Rodgers, who is a family recovery coach. And I'm glad to have both of them here. I met Sam kind of over the phone a few months ago. We were working on a case together, and we hadn't met in person. And then I had the opportunity to have lunch with him recently. And while we were talking, I thought he would be a great guest for our podcast. And in our conversation before we met in person, he had told me about Darryl. And so I had Darryl come in one night and do a tour and and come to our family group, which we do on Wednesday nights. And then he came back because he had never met Sam in person today to have lunch and do a tour. And then we roped Darryl in to be on this podcast with Sam. So anyway, I'm going to shut up for a second. And I'll start with Sam. Just tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, I'm an interventionist. And what that means is, a lot of people think it means that we come in with sabers rattling, loaded for bear, ready to just wrangle up their loved one, say some profound words and haul them off, or either yell at them, scream at them, point fingers, tell them they're an alcoholic and they suck and they need to go to treatment.
That's what happened to me.
My
family did that.
But that's not what an interventionist does. That's not what an intervention is. I'm there to guide families and provide strategy and options and a path for them to follow and to bounce things off of, and to really just lean on and talk them out of the trees and just keep them on the path as best I can and help them, guide them through this rocky road of addiction. You know, it's when we're all emotionally wrapped up into something, we can't see things very clearly. So you need someone that's not emotionally attached to sit there and kind of talk you through it. And that's what we do. We do in person. And there's nothing I'd rather be doing when I'm sitting in a family's living room, knee to knee, you know.
I hear you. And I love that feeling of feeling like I'm not working. You know, I catch myself sometimes because I feel like I'm not working. I'm overcome with a little bit of anxiety, because it's a familiar feeling from, about 5.5 years ago. I had that very same feeling, but it was because I wasn't working and I was supposed to be. But this doesn't feel like work because I love doing it. What about you? What do you do, Darryl?
So, like you said, I'm a family recovery coach, and my primary role is helping families understand what their proper role is in the recovery process. I think that a lot of times parents, there's some enabling behaviors, rescuing behaviors, things like that they fall into. And that's a normal thing. I mean, it's normal when your child is in trouble that you want to help. But there are right ways to help and ways to help that aren't so good, that aren't healthy for the person who is dealing with the addiction or for the family. And so I help them work on that and provide some accountability.
Thank you. Would you mind sharing with us how you found yourself in this world, so to speak?
Yeah, so I made my own mistakes in that arena, and so parents can, and I don't mind sharing those, and parents can learn from that. And My oldest of two boys, Chase, died in 2014 in a drug-impaired wreck after struggling with addiction for about a year and a half. And I began doing prevention. I wrote a book that came out in 2015, began doing drug prevention speaking after that, and just was looking for other ways to help families. And it was actually interventionists that directed me towards PAL, which is Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. It's a peer support group for parents that have a child that is addicted to drugs or alcohol. And so through my volunteering with PAL, I learned a lot about what families need in terms of education around dealing with their addicted son or daughter.
How'd you get into this line of work?
Man, I did a lot of cocaine, took a lot of methadone, smoked a lot of weed, and ate a lot of pills.
I hear you.
You know, that's how that happened. I had been to several treatment programs. My family didn't really know what to do with me. And I knew that I was created to be something different than a bottomed out crackhead. I had no idea how to figure that out or how to make that happen. My family stepped in, got the education they needed, began to take action, fired me from the decision making as best they could with an interventionist, which was very effective. And I ended up in long-term, truly individualized care. And when I left there, I knew that the message that I had received and the transformation that I had made, I knew then that there was a lot of families that needed some support, that needed a true message, that needed hope and needed a path. And it was just something in me. It wasn't of me, but it was in me because I'm, as an addicted individual, I was a very selfish, self-centered person, and I can still be very selfish and self-centered. So that's why I know that it was something within me, not of me, that has just laid this in my lap. It was like, it's what was supposed to happen. And I went and got trained, and that was 12 years ago, and hung out my little shingle and been doing it ever since.
That's awesome. I remember when we talked, I was asking you what, I don't know too much about them. I'm not an interventionist. I work with interventionists like yourself, but I know I'm confident I'm speaking for lots of people who will hopefully hear and see this. They sort of see what they see on TV, and it's only that surprise. And I asked you, kind of what you do, and you seem to have your own kind of methodology that combines. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's the invitational model of intervention, and then there's the more classic surprise model of intervention. I like to combine the two. Now, most of the time on my interventions, they're on a need-to-know basis, and right then and there, the individual doesn't need to know. That's for their own good. It's not like we're trying to be deceiving or lying or anything. Like, it's just a flat out, they're on a need-to-know basis, and right now they don't need to know. That's a large majority of them. But if I can find an opportunity to weave in an invitation without outright saying, hey, we'd like you to come over next Wednesday evening and discuss your heroin problem, or discuss your drinking problem with the rest of us and our family issue. We don't really outright say that. But if we can wiggle in an invitation, we'll do that.
Yeah.
I'm doing a session where the individual was invited into the process, and I've done that several times. We'll invite them into the process, and we'll slow the roll of an intervention sometimes. That's more so really for the family. A family it's very fearful of what an intervention would entail, which fear is a big liar. Fear is fantasy. It's going to show you worst case scenario. But we have to meet the families where they are and with their willingness and to set boundaries and hold boundaries, because you don't want them to set a boundary that they're not going to hold.
Right.
So we'll do sessions with them an hour at a time. We're moving a lot of people to treatment without having to do that formal sit-down intervention. Now, nothing takes the place of that. There's a magic when the family sits down. The family's scared to death. They're always worried that their loved one's going to run out and kill themselves, or they're going to get angry and run off, that they're going to get violent. All of these things that their fear tells them, right? What it really is a very magical moment. It's a very powerful experience that no one in that living room or wherever you're having the intervention will ever forget. I never forget them. I may lose track after years or may slip my mind, but if that family calls me to update me or just say Merry Christmas or whatever, which happens a lot, and they say their name, and so many years ago today you stepped in, it'll come right back to me. They're extremely powerful experiences. It's a place where families come in with love and support, but firm and direct and honest communication in a kind and loving way, and also direct. It's so powerful. I can't explain it well enough how powerful of an experience it is.
At what point in as a family recovery coach, do you get to a point where you realize, hey, you're not holding boundaries as a family unit? I think you may need to talk to somebody like Sam. I mean, have you had any experience like that you could talk about?
Yeah, I see parents get hung up on the decision-making process a lot, where they're just overcome with fear.
Mm-hmm.
And they need some help making that decision to either to give their child, an option, either go to treatment and we'll pay for it, or you're going to have to pack your bags and move out. And I've seen situations where the child is living at home in their 30s and right on, and still using drugs, and there are no changes taking place, and that's not good for the parents, not good for the child, and so it's really about helping them make that decision to take some action and make a change.
Yeah, I mean, both of you have mentioned fear, and both of you have both said boundaries, and that's something that we talk about all the time in recovery, all the time on this podcast. I talk about it all the time in my personal life in recovery. And, I just talk about the creating of is one thing. It's kind of like when somebody asks for help, that's great. But then it's really all about the receiving of the help. And then the same thing with the boundaries. And it's not for me to ever say what those boundaries are for a family. And I'm not an interventionist, but I do have these conversations on a, very basic level of creating the boundaries, but then the real magic is then the sticking to the boundaries. Can you talk a little bit about kind of on how you advise families on what those boundaries are and, what the kind of degrees of boundaries are?
Well, I can tell you that when we first start working with a family, we're not coming out of the gate saying, hey, you're going to tell them to, it's this or the highway.
Mm-hmm.
Because you look at a boundary like a muscle. It has to be exercised, and you just can't go start deadlifting 1,000 pounds. You got to start off a little lightweight.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of misinformation, right, or misunderstanding around an intervention, because we've gotten a lot of calls through the years where they'll call and say, can you be here this afternoon and intervene? And it really doesn't work that way. We want time to plan with the family and strategize, and I like to get them started on the intervention process. Starts as soon as they engage us. Mm-hmm. We want them to start exercising that boundary muscle on a little smaller scale, right? Get the feel of it. Feel the weight a little bit. Figure out how it feels in your body, right? And express that boundary and watch how all of that fear that you had around setting that boundary didn't come true. Starts building some confidence, and they can set another boundary and another boundary. Plus, we want the individual to know when we walk in on them the day of the intervention, the loved one, that they have sensed already that some things have changed with the family. So this is not just something that they're pulling today, just another thing. Mm-hmm. Like, they're serious. My family is very serious about this.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because I've never heard it expressed like that. That kind of leading, like building up to when working the muscle, because that's such a great point. If all of a sudden these people who have just been enabling, and they don't mean to, my parents certainly didn't mean to. My parents are great, and I should sort of retract my statement. They didn't look at me and point a finger and say, you're an alcoholic, you suck. They were worried sick and crying and sad and just couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And I was probably going to be intervened upon soon, but I went willingly. But these who have been enabling and giving and bailing out, and then all of a sudden one day they're just supposed to do a complete 180 and say, you're cut off, we're done, it's this or the highway, like you said. That's a great point. I've never heard it said like that, like with the, one little thing. No, we're not going to do this one thing that you're asking for. So just to kind of plant the seed that things are changing, that the wheels are in motion, that we are changing as a family unit, because that's something that people talk to families every day about this. A lot of them see it as a sentence and a punishment for them. They're like, what, why? My kid or my husband or my wife, they're the one who they have the problem. Why do I have to change my ways? And what I've learned in my personal recovery and in working in this field is that it's a kind of a gift for the families too. Even they don't have to go through what I went through and what you went through to be, active alcoholics and addicts to get help and get better. These families, in going through this process with you, they not only get to help their son or their daughter or whatever loved one it is, but they get to start healing themselves, So
Then one very simple yet very profound experience is to begin with no.
yeah, it's a complete sentence.
Complete sentence. And we'll find ourselves wanting to justify why we're saying no, because internally it has nothing to do with them. It's about us. But just no.
Right. And just getting through that fear.
Just feel that.
Yeah. But
feel
the
with
fear,
that, set that, sit with it. Notice through the experience that the skies aren't parting and the earth isn't crumbling and your loved one is maybe a little angry, but you're still surviving and so are they.
Right. Yeah.
You can have all the information, but you need to have an experience.
Mm-hmm.
I can sit on the phone with somebody for 12 hours a day talking about an intervention and talking about this and talking about that, but you have to experience it, and it's really not something you want to just dive right into the intervention day. You want to have the experiences leading up to it. They build on each other.
And so when you're prepping for an intervention, and they can go from a month out to what's the kind of what's the
I'd say
timeline?
average time's about 5 days, but
Okay.
we're seeing some more complicated cases. We're seeing some more complex family systems, multiple substance use disorder, family members, lots of trauma. COVID hadn't helped. So I can only speak for me. I don't know about other interventionists. It's starting to be a little bit a longer process of the coaching and the prep work and the understanding and all of that.
I'll start with you. What, in terms of just substance, what do you see the most?
In terms of
Like Darryl, my son is on.
yeah, that's interesting. When first started, it was opioids a lot, and now a lot of parents coming to me, it's marijuana is the main issue. I think it's the increase in the potency of the marijuana that's out there now, and obviously the different forms. If you're smoking dabs or some other wax extracts that can really high THC content, then a lot of issues with that.
Do you include Delta 8 and Delta 9 in that?
Yeah, and when I first started hearing about Delta 8, parents in my group were telling me, their children were experiencing, when I say children, teenagers, young adults, obviously, but they're experiencing some psychosis issues around Delta 8.
Absolutely.
And when they first started talking about Delta 8, they were ahead of me. I was like, what? What are you talking about? And I had to start doing my research on Delta 8,
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think a lot of people there are people that I hear about who are trying to recover, and maybe they've been to treatment and they're staying off of their substance that's their go-to, that's their primary substance, but then they kind of think, well, Delta 8, that's not so bad, and besides it's legal, and so they'll go start experimenting with that a little bit, and just something to take the edge off. And I don't know, it'd be better if they were just completely sober, but if you're a parent, you'd rather they would be smoking Delta 8 than shooting up heroin or something like that.
For sure. But there's there's this myth that, marijuana, even though it's not legal in North Carolina, it's legal in so many states. It's been normalized for so long that the general consensus is it's harmless.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely not harmless.
Yeah, that's correct.
And like you said, the dab and the oil, that makes it so much more potent. The real withdrawal effects of that, and Delta 8 and Delta 9 causing full-on psychosis. And so it's funny though, because that argument, but it's basically it's legal, or because the Delta 8 and Delta 9 can be bought in a gas station, but so can beer and wine and booze, but nobody really says that's harmless. What about you? What do you see the most of in your interventions in terms of substance?
Man, what is flooding the news channels and social media and everything is fentanyl, right? You hear that everywhere, and it's killing people. It's a very dangerous drug, and there's a lot of it, and it's a bad thing. Horrible. But in my experience, what I'm seeing the most of, I certainly get the fentanyl cases and the Xanax and the cocaine. And I get all of those, but by far, it's marijuana and alcohol.
Yeah, here I was sure that we were going to see, probably like 60-40, if not, 60-40 alcohol, 40% drugs, mainly opiates, specifically fentanyl. And we get, like you were saying, we get all that, but it's mostly 80 to 90% of people here are here for alcohol. We have plenty of benzos, and we get people here just from Delta 8 and weed and all that, but it's mostly alcohol. I mean, it's still king alcohol. I wanted to change gears for 1 second, because I want you to talk about how y'all met each other in this modern way.
Man, I'm sitting there scrolling TikTok. This handsome fella pops up, starts talking about a message that resonated with me. He spoke my language, and a lot of people don't understand how big sober TikTok is and recovery TikTok. And everybody thinks it's about, kids dancing and doing silly challenges and things like that. I started putting out some content about a year and a half ago, and I like being creative. I feel like I had stifled that for so many years, and the longer I'm sober, the more I'm authentic me, and I don't make apologies for that. And it goes along with that internal drive of there was a message to be given. So I started putting out some short form content on TikTok, and grew pretty well. And I've just met him on TikTok. We got the messaging back and forth and all. So
Yeah,
and then here we are.
Yeah, well, I know. And as you were telling me, it just made me think. I mean, we're all, we all work in this, called an industry. I feel dirty sometimes calling it that, but it is. And but I was just thinking, I wonder how many, bankers would be like, hey, why don't you come? They're the collaboration, unless it's for absolute profit. You don't find that in anywhere else, I don't think. I mean, we just all want to help people, and it's a beautiful thing to see people find each other in these. As far as I can tell, none of us are teenage girls, and yet TikTok, brought us together here today.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at your hat. Says for the people who can't see us, Rule 62. Tell them about Rule 62.
This one came from TikTok. A fella out of Georgia sent it up to me. I think it's from Georgia Hat Company.
Okay.
And he was in sobriety. He sent it with a note and said, hey, I've been digging your message and your content. Here's your hat, and I make them for some people that are sober. Rule 62 means don't take yourself so damn seriously. Yeah. And I have to, when I wear it, it's not wearing as much outward as when I'm looking in the mirror in the morning, looking in the mirror when I'm getting dressed. It's like, man, don't take yourself so damn seriously. You're really not all that important. And let's just go along with the flow of things today.
Yeah, I need to see that. I need to hear that every day of my life. And so you tell me a little bit about what you do locally, like on a day to day. I mean, you have a day job, right?
Nope.
Okay. Tell me about what you do on your day-to-day.
So actually, what brought me to this area, I was a pilot. I flew for American Eagle, and I flew a commuter airline right here out of Raleigh, and I flew Apache helicopters in the Army National Guard when we first moved here. I wanted to be close to the airport, so moved into Cary, and so and we've been here ever since. But I've owned several small businesses over the years. And, when my son died, I wrote a book about his life. And then I started getting some opportunities to do some speaking, public speaking. And so I started doing drug prevention speaking. And I still do that. But I started working with the parents in the PAL group on a volunteer basis. And I'm on the board for North Carolina Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. Against drunk driving. Let me get that right. Against drunk driving, not against drunk drivers. I'm on their board, and I do some speaking for them. And so, I was just doing some of the volunteer work, and just realizing that a lot of parents need a lot more than just that one meeting of a peer support group one night a week. They need more accountability. They need a structure that helps them move forward in the family recovery process. So I'm launching a online group coaching program for families, for parents who need the help understanding their role in the family recovery process, and then having that accountability, like I said, that they need. I always tell parents that, they don't have any control over what their son or daughter does, but they give their son or daughter their best opportunity to recover when they work on themselves, when they work on their own personal development, their own personal growth, their own spiritual growth, their own self-care. When they work on that, they're putting their child in the best position they can to recover.
Love it. So you being an interventionist and somebody in recovery, what do you see just as, what are we doing wrong? What can we be doing better as just, there's one thing you mentioned earlier that I want you to touch on, but if there's anything else, but so we need to be more connecting, not as much selling. Is that right? Expand on that.
Yeah. You Google treatment, drug treatment. Just Google it.
Bad idea, by the way, for anybody listening.
Horrible idea, right? Just Google it.
Yeah.
You'll see.
Yeah.
Right? Healing pines by the seashore, the tranquility life of serenity springs of the hope of love. They can handle all of your needs. They'll say we handle cocaine addiction. We have a methadone track, a methamphetamine track. We have a marijuana track, all these different tracks. Mm-hmm. Right? There's too much selling and not enough connection, because I can tell you what's going on from my eyes. When you look at the success rates of treatment center, we were talking about this earlier today, and it's been coming up for the last couple of days. When you look at success rates of, sometimes they range 3 to 15%.
Yeah,
success rate.
It's not good,
right? And we have the public, and I don't mean to sound like I'm putting all of this on the population and the public, but we have to own our role in that. Mm. You're looking at 3 to 18% or 3 to 13, 3 to 15, whatever it is. Either one of them are low. None of them are acceptable. Mm-hmm. You've got a population of people where I want to go out on a limb. I don't have the research to back it. I'm going to go by my experiences of what I've seen in the last 12 years. And what is self-reported to me from families is that 90% of the families out here, and individuals that are in treatment and families that put them in treatment, don't really know down at the level necessary internally why their loved one is in treatment. Mm-hmm. They think that it's just to learn how to cure them of drug addiction or cure them of alcoholism or teach them how to say no. And they don't know the role they can play in their recovery through boundaries. Mm-hmm. So you have 90% of the public doesn't know really why they're in treatment or why they sent their loved one to treatment. But they're saying treatment centers are horrible, which there's a lot of bad players, but there's bad players in every industry, yet the industry has an overall better success, like plumbing has some bad players in it, but I'm pretty sure that they can fix your leak if you call a plumber 100% of the time, more than likely, right? Yeah. Well, there's lots of great addiction treatment around the country. The people are saying, well, these success rates suck. Well, if you can lower the number of families, the percentage of families that don't know really why their loved one or they're sending their loved one to treatment, or while they're in treatment. If you can lower that, you're going to increase those success rates. The treatment industry needs to take some ownership, and hey, how are we giving information to the public? We're doing too much selling and not enough connecting, and the public needs to recognize and be more aware of, hey, the more educated we get, the more boundaries that we set, and the more we utilize our family power, the more success we're going to see in our loved one when they go to treatment.
I think about these stats a lot because they're not good. And I wonder, and I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on this. Part of this is just my own personal take on this is, while it's a great thing that the stigma is pretty much removed from addiction and alcoholism. You know, I mean, it's not like.
But is it though?
Well, I mean,
is it though? Because
pretty much.
Because you hear when people are snapping at the industry, talking about treatment programs or run by. You'll see some of these articles come out, and I find it alarming because they appear to, and they're screaming that they're advocating for the poor, sick, and suffering addicted individual. And then they'll get in there in the same breath and say that treatment centers are run by former addicts, and they say it in a shaming way. Like that's a bad thing. I know recovering addicted individuals that are flying your loved one across the country in an airplane. I know recovered individuals that are operating on your son or operating on your grandmother in the hospital. You know.
Yeah, I mean, there's no one I trust more than somebody in recovery.
Yeah.
No, but I will retract. Pretty much, the stigma has been removed, but it's way less than it was, 50 years ago or more. But let's say, and I don't want to mention the specific type of recovery that I'm in, but we can guess what it is. That was founded in 1935, and the odds then, and the stats then, the chances of recovery were triple what they are now. And I wonder if part of it is because now it's so socially acceptable to be, to go to treatment, and that that it's not just the shame of that is lessened. I'm not saying it's gone. The stigma is not gone, but it's lessened by, significantly. And the fact that it's so accepted, I wonder if there's not the severity of needing help that there used to be when people would get to that level when they did find sobriety and recovery. But now that's why we see so many people that are in and out, frequent flyers, we call them, in these places, and I just wonder if that has something to do with it, where it's a good thing that the stigma's been lessened so much, but yet it's so acceptable to go to treatment that doesn't seem like that big a deal anymore. Am I crazy to think that?
That's a tough one. Yeah. I mean, there's sort of a balance, there that we need to strike. Yeah, I mean, I think you may be onto something there. My views have changed, since, when my son, when I first found out he had a problem, I was very judgmental of people who had a drug or alcohol problem. I didn't understand. And certainly I would say that the stigma has been reduced. I see both sides of it. And it's hard to say, is that playing into people, maybe it is so much more acceptable now? I don't know. I can't really answer that definitively.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I can tell, and when this thing first kicked off in 1935, I mean, it was hard to get to the grocery store in 1935. I mean, there were grocery stores all over the country.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wasn't a comfortable ride. It was, it was 1935.
Yeah.
This thing that you're talking about was just created. It wasn't everywhere. It wasn't broadcast everywhere. Judges weren't sending people to it. There weren't treatment centers in every town.
Yeah.
There were sanitariums, and the sanitarium was not a place you really wanted to go.
Right.
It sounds cool, kind of sounds like aquarium, right? Which is cool. But a sanitarium, my friend, is not a comfortable place, right?
Yeah.
So none of that was good. And then you went to find your butt in a seat at one of those meetings from the 30s to the 60s or whatever.
Yeah.
There was some desperation on your part to seek out that meeting and go in there and sit down. There was some desperation. I think desperation is the key.
Yeah, well.
Because
Yes.
now you can just wave your hand and say, whoa, going to treatment.
Yeah.
You know, or,
That's a great
hey,
point.
the judge says, hey, you got or sentence you to, hey,
Yeah.
sentence me. What?
Yeah.
You know,
The
so
nudge from the judge. That's a great point. It's more accessible and it's more, it might be more acceptable. But yes, it's not like people don't have the bottoms have been rising as well.
Yeah.
And it's not always up to the person what that bottom is. Like, I mean, kind of what we all do too. That as far as I know, there weren't real interventionists then. There were 12-steppers
Right.
going to 12-step people, but not, there just weren't so many places to go and so many. And
Right.
the accessibility of not just booze, but now, I mean, especially now online. I mean, people can have a pharmacy in their house in 24 hours.
yeah.
But anyway, I just think about those stats because they're not good. And but you're right. And it was such a smaller sample size too back then.
And you think about it, like
Yeah.
you walk into a meeting today. At the end of that meeting, this is just for an example. This is one example, maybe a weird example, but I'm going to throw it out there. You walk into a meeting today. At the end of the meeting, you circle up and you say the Serenity Prayer, and everybody just kind of sings it off, right? Grant me the serenity, accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can. And we all seem to do this, and the willingness to know the difference. And then we go on. It's like this thing in the meetings today, it's just become so, what's the word I'm looking for? Desensitized?
Yeah, like transactional a little bit.
Yeah, like it's just something that we're doing. Probably back in the day, they're saying, hey, you want a little bit of serenity to get you through until the next meeting. So you're not jumping out of a window or jumping in front of a bus or suck starting a 12 gauge. If you want to be granted a little bit of serenity, hey, maybe you need to really sit in silence in the morning before you get cranking up and say, to accept the things I cannot change. And then you sit there for a little while and try to figure out what are the things that you cannot change. And then after you've done that, young man, you're going to want to sit there for a little bit, the courage to change the things I can. And you're going to want to sit there and think about what can I change? And then you're going to really be seeking through the day the wisdom to know the difference. See, that's some action that was put in that's action steps. And back in the day, when you couple that with some more desperation that people had back then, right? You're going to get better results.
And I'm glad you brought up desperation too, because all of this, to me, what I see, what really gets people to make a change is the God gift of desperation. Because we can lead a horse to water and we can have interventions and we can get them there, and like, it wasn't, I tell people this all the time, we can go get sober for anybody, but we can only stay that way for ourselves. And I don't see a lot of people finding lasting recovery without desperation, that gift of desperation, and I hope I never forget how desperate I was,
What is desperation? What is surrender, right? We talk about surrender. We talk about desperation. I know for me and for countless others that I know in a process, when you're giving up, you have to surrender old ideas. You have to surrender old beliefs. You have to surrender old habits. That is no different than surrendering when you're in an army, in a war, or in combat. Surrender is surrender. I have never yet seen through history, and I love history, where an army or a country surrendered until they were desperate.
That's a great point. Exactly.
So desperation is required
Yes.
in order to surrender to, at the time, such a foreign concept is recovery.
Right.
You know how foreign that is to us, that our brain is telling us that if we don't have that substance in the next 2 minutes, we're going to die. Even though that's not true, our mind is just about telling us that, and we're buying it hook, line, and sinker. It's like you're asking us to stop breathing air. So in order for us to embrace that step, requires surrender. And that's really what an intervention is about too, is to help create some desperation. As long as I got options, I'm not getting well. I don't care. I don't care how many massages I'm getting, how many, how long I'm going to be gone, or how little I'm going to be gone, or what state I'm going to be in. I'm not going, and I'm not going to get well if I perceive I have options to stay the same.
Man, I'm thinking about how all of this applies to the parent side of things, and you're talking about desperation. What I tell people, it's like when you have a child that's addicted to drugs or alcohol. It's like you have these butterflies in the pit of your stomach that never go away, never completely go away, and there's always this little fear in the back of your mind. And it just takes one little thing to trigger you, really set you off, like the phone rings late at night. And the first thing you've tried to suppress all these fears, right? But the first thought that pops in your head is that the police? What do they want? You know? So, but parents, that desperation drives them to control, right? And that's the one thing, they have to get so desperate that they realize they don't have any control, and they have to give up those attempts at control. And I use this visual of an archer. And imagine that your child is an arrow, and you place an arrow in the string, and the target that you're aiming at is kind of a general target in that I just want them to be successful and happy, you know, and successful in terms of finding that thing that they love to do and being good at it. And you aim at that target, you draw that arrow back, and you release that arrow with that string. And guess what? It happens a lot of times. Their parents pull back and they get that arrow back there. They find their anchor point, and they don't want to let go. Mm-hmm. And the longer you hang on, guess what happens? Your muscles start to burn. You start to quiver. You start to shake. You don't get a smooth release. You're less likely to hit your target. But that sensation of those muscles burning, that to me, that's that stress that parents are feeling when they're still trying to hang on, because there is this transition process from childhood through the teenage years to adulthood. And I don't know that anybody's really taught how to do that as a parent, especially when your first child comes along and like they're going through the teenage years and there's all this turbulence, and you're going, well, is that just what teenagers go through, or is there something else going on here? And a lot of times it's hard to tell. Is it? I was going through that with our son. Is this just him going through his teenage years, or is he using drugs? And anyway, but you know, they've got to get to that point where they're so desperate that they are and that they're coached up on this, where they can let go of that arrow. And then it's in God's hands, and your child's hands, because this arrow has a brain, right? And it can go wherever it wants to go. But yeah, a wind can come along and knock it off course, or it can hit a low-hanging branch or whatever. Different things can happen in that arrow along the way, but there's nothing you can do about it. It's up to that arrow and God at that point, and you just have to say, well, I did my best. I did my part, right? And now the rest is up to them. And that trying to hang on is what causes so many problems for families. That's
a great analogy. And just that whole, you know, we're in the footwork business, not the results business, and just, you know, letting go and letting God. I love that. Anybody got any final thoughts?
Oh, shit. I had a ton of them until you asked me.
Well, this is awesome. Y'all are great guests.
It's great to be here. I appreciate you inviting us in today.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's pretty fancy, so.
Yeah, well, you know,
I thought I was sitting. What's that show, Between Two Ferns?
Between Two Ferns. And you thought I was just going to insult you?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of looks like the set.
Come back for the 9:30 show. It gets a little blue.
Ooh.
Yeah. All right. All right. We will, like I said, we will put all your pertinent information and post all your links and email and contact information. But anyway, just thank y'all both so much. This was awesome.
Man, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming down.
Thanks for being on this with me too, man.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate you guys inviting me in.
Yeah. All right.